The late afternoon sun spilled through the living room windows, casting a golden hue across the polished wooden floor. Claire adjusted the flower vase on the coffee table for the third time that day, her mind racing with half formed thoughts she couldn't quite articulate. Life in the Thompson household was tranquil on the surface, a steady rhythm of quiet dinners, shared responsibilities, and polite conversations. But beneath that calm exterior lay ripples, small yet persistent, of something unspoken. Claire had married David Thompson 2 years ago. A widower in his late 40s, David exuded an aura of reliability and quiet strength. He wasn't the romantic type, but he was kind, protective, and devoted to his teenage daughter, Lily. When Claire entered their lives, she did so with the best intentions, to bring a sense of warmth and unity to their fractured family. And for a while, she thought she had succeeded. Lily was 17, sharp witted and precocious, with a natural charm that drew people to her effortlessly. Yet she was distant in a way that Claire couldn't quite decipher, neither cold nor warm, but observing, as if waiting for something. At first, their relationship was polite, tinged with formality, but over time, Claire found herself gravitating toward the girl. There was a depth to Lily that intrigued her, a sensitivity that mirrored her own. Their conversations grew longer, their moments together more frequent, until they had formed an unspoken bond. One evening, David walked into the living room and paused at the doorway. Claire and Lily were seated on the floor, their heads bent close together, whispering about something that had made them both laugh. David watched them silently, a faint smile on his lips. But as he turned away, there was a flicker of something else in his expression, something wary. Claire didn't notice. She was too engrossed in her growing connection with Lily to sense the subtle shifts in her husband's demeanor. The days slipped by in a blur of shared laughter and stolen glances, moments that seemed innocent but carried an undercurrent Claire couldn't quite name. Then came the incident. It was a Saturday afternoon. David had gone to the hardware store, leaving Claire and Lily alone in the house. Claire was in the kitchen when Lily came up behind her, startling her with a soft touch on the shoulder. What happened next wasn't unusual. It was just different. The air seemed to change, thickening with an energy Claire couldn't place. She caught Lily's eyes for a second too long, and the silence that followed was deafening. David returned earlier than expected. He walked into the kitchen to find them standing close, their heads snapping toward him as if caught in the middle of something. He didn't say a word. His eyes lingered on Claire's face for a moment, then shifted to Lily's. The tension was palpable, but he merely set his keys on the counter and walked away. That night, as Claire lay beside David in bed, she felt the distance between them as a physical thing. He didn't reach for her, didn't say goodnight. She stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment in the kitchen. Was it her imagination, or had something truly shifted? David's demeanor changed in the days that followed. He wasn't overtly hostile, but there was a new edge to his interactions. He watched Claire and Lily more closely, his gaze lingering longer than before. Claire noticed, but she couldn't bring herself to ask him about it. What would she say? That he was imagining things, that she was too. One evening, during dinner, David spoke abruptly. "You and Lily seem to be getting along well," he said, his tone carefully neutral. Claire looked up from her plate, startled. "Yes, I think we've built a good relationship," she replied cautiously, glancing at Lily, who was busy pushing her vegetables around her plate. David nodded but didn't respond. The silence that followed was heavy, stretching uncomfortably long. Later that night, Claire found herself replaying the conversation. David's tone hadn't been accusatory, but it had carried an undercurrent she couldn't ignore. Was he suspicious of what? The thought made her stomach churn. Meanwhile, David's suspicions grew. He began paying closer attention to the small details, the way Claire and Lily laughed at inside jokes he didn't understand, the fleeting touches, the moments they seemed lost in their own world. At first, he tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to his own insecurities. But the more he observed, the harder it became to ignore. One afternoon, David came home early from work. He walked into the living room to find Claire and Lily seated on the couch, their heads close together, speaking in hushed tones. They both looked up as he entered, their expressions momentarily startled. The room fell silent. "What were you two talking about?" he asked casually, though his tone betrayed a hint of something sharper. "Just school stuff," Lily replied quickly, her voice a little too bright. Claire forced a smile. "Yes, she was telling me about her art project." David nodded, but his eyes lingered on them for a moment too long before he walked away. In his mind, doubts began to crystallize into something darker. That night, David sat in his study, staring at his computer screen, but unable to focus on the spreadsheets in front of him. The image of Claire and Lily on the couch replayed in his mind, accompanied by a growing sense of unease. He opened Claire's laptop, which she had left on the desk, and began scrolling through her emails and messages. Most of it was mundane work, emails, group chats with friends, but then he found a series of messages exchanged with Lily. The messages weren't incriminating, but they were unusual. There was an intimacy to them that felt out of place, a level of connection that made David's chest tighten. He closed the laptop abruptly, his hands trembling. Was he overreacting? Was his mind playing tricks on him? Or was there something real, something dangerous happening under his roof over the next week? David's behavior became more erratic. He began asking pointed questions, his tone sharper than he intended. Claire started to feel as though she was walking on eggshells, unsure of what she had done to provoke his scrutiny. Lily, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. If anything, she grew bolder, her actions and words increasingly challenging. One night, as Claire and David sat in the living room watching TV, Lily entered the room and sat beside Claire. She leaned in, whispering something in Claire's ear that made her laugh softly. David watched them from the corner of his eye, his jaw tightening. He turned off the TV abruptly and stood up. "I'm going to bed," he announced, his voice clipped. Claire looked up, surprised. "It's only mine. I'm tired," he said curtly, leaving the room without another word. Claire sat in silence, her laughter fading. She glanced at Lily, who was staring after her father with a smirk. Something about expression sent a chill down Claire's spine. The house seemed quieter than usual, but it was a deceptive silence, one that carried an undercurrent of tension. Claire began noticing David's unease more clearly now. He avoided direct confrontation, but would linger in doorways, his eyes scrutinizing every interaction between her and Lily. At first, Claire tried to dismiss it as stress from his job, but the cracks in their facade widened with each passing day. One afternoon, Claire was folding laundry in the bedroom when David entered. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "You spend a lot of time with Lily," he said, his voice even but edged with something sharper. Claire paused, a folded shirt in her hands. "She's been opening up to me more lately. Isn't that a good thing?" David's expression was unreadable. "It depends." Claire frowned, placing the shirt down. "What's that supposed to mean?" David shrugged and left without another word, leaving her standing there, bewildered. She turned the conversation over in her mind for the rest of the day, trying to decipher the implications behind his words. That evening, as Claire prepared dinner, Lily appeared in the kitchen. She slipped onto a bar stool, watching Claire with an intensity that felt both comforting and unnerving. "You look stressed," Lily said, tilting her head. Claire forced a smile. "Your dad's being different lately," Lily smirked, her eyes glinting with mischief. "He's always been the serious type. It's more than that," Claire murmured, her hands stilling on the cutting board. "I think he's upset with me. Or us." Lily leaned forward, resting her chin in her hand. "Does it matter?" He doesn't understand us. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Claire's chest tightened, but she didn't reply. Instead, she focused on chopping vegetables, hoping the repetitive motion would drown out the thoughts swirling in her mind. Over the next few days, David's suspicions grew more pronounced. He began returning home unexpectedly, his presence looming over the house like a storm cloud. One evening, he walked into the living room and found Claire and Lily sitting unusually close on the couch. They sprang apart as if burned, their expressions a mix of guilt and surprise. "What's going on here?" David demanded, his voice sharp. Claire shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "Nothing. We were just talking." David's gaze darted between them, his eyes narrowing. It didn't look like nothing. Lily crossed her arms, her tone defiant. "Why are you always watching us?" "It's creepy, Lily," Claire scolded, but her reprimand lacked conviction. David's jaw clenched, and he turned to leave. "You're hiding something," he muttered under his breath. That night, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. David's words echoed in her mind, mingling with Lily's earlier comment, "He doesn't understand us." For the first time, Claire began to question the boundaries of her relationship with Lily. Were they too close? Had they crossed an invisible line without realizing it? A few days later, David found a reason to dig deeper. He overheard snippets of a whispered conversation between Claire and Lily in the hallway. The words were innocuous, something about plans for the weekend, but their hushed tones and the way they immediately fell silent when he appeared sent alarm bells ringing in his mind. That night, while Claire was in the shower, David opened her phone. He scrolled through her messages with Lily, his hands shaking. The words weren't explicit, but the tone of their exchanges felt intimate, almost conspiratorial. A knot formed in his stomach as he closed the phone, placing it back on the nightstand before she could notice. David's paranoia escalated. He began checking their every interaction, searching for signs to confirm his growing fears. The strain in the household was palpable, with conversations turning terse and the once warm atmosphere now heavy with suspicion. The evening that everything came to a head started like any other. Dinner was quiet, the clinking of utensils against plates the only sound in the room. David's gaze kept flicking between Claire and Lily, his thoughts a tangled web of doubt and anger. Claire could feel his eyes on her, but she kept her focus on her plate, pretending not to notice. After dinner, Lily excused herself and went upstairs. Claire stayed behind to clean up, but she barely made it to the sink before David's voice cut through the room. "We need to talk." She turned, her hands gripping the counter. "About what?" David stepped closer, his expression cold and unyielding. "About you and Lily." Claire's breath caught. "What about us?" David's lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't play dumb, Claire. I see the way you look at each other, the way you act when you think I'm not watching." Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You're imagining things were close, but that's it." David shook his head, his voice rising. "Close? Rising. Close? That's not just close. You've crossed a line, Claire, and you know it." Claire's hands trembled. "You don't understand. Then explain it to me," David shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "What the hell is going on between you two upstairs?" Lily heard the commotion. She hesitated for a moment before descending the stairs, her face calm but her eyes blazing with determination. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. David turned to her, his expression dark. "I was just asking your mother to explain what's been happening under my roof." Lily's lips curved into a defiant smile. "You mean us? Why don't you ask me directly?" Claire's head snapped toward Lily, her eyes wide. "Lily, don't," but Lily ignored her, stepping closer to David. "You think you know everything, don't you? But you don't understand her." "You don't understand us?" David's face contorted with anger and disbelief. "What are you saying?" Lily's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. I'm saying that she makes me feel alive, that she sees me in a way you never have. Claire's heart sank. Lily, stop, she whispered, her voice cracking. But Lily didn't stop. I love her, she said, her voice ringing out like a challenge. And she loves me even if she's too scared to admit it. David stared at her, his face a mask of shock and fury. You're sick, he spat. Both of you. He turned to Claire, his voice trembling with rage. How could you let this happen? How could you betray me like this? Tears welled in Claire's eyes. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I tried to stop it, but what? David interrupted. You couldn't help yourself? The words cut through her like a blade, leaving her speechless. Lily stepped in front of her, shielding her from David's glare. She didn't betray you, Lily said coldly. You betrayed her. You were never there for her, never gave her what she needed. So don't act like the victim now. David let out a bitter laugh. This is unbelievable. You're both delusional. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the silence, leaving Claire and Lily standing alone in the aftermath of his fury. The house felt emptier after David's departure, as if the air itself had been sucked out. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she clutched a glass of water she didn't intend to drink. Lily sat beside her, silent for once, her expression unreadable. The echoes of the argument still reverberated in Claire's mind, each word slicing deeper than the last. Do you think he's coming back? Claire finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily shrugged, her gaze fixed on the floor. Does it matter? Claire turned to her, eyes wide. Of course it matters. He's your father. He's my husband. Lily's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Is he? He hasn't acted like it in a long time? All he does is watch, judge, and blame. Claire wanted to argue, but she couldn't. David's distance, his suspicion, it had been building for months, but hadn't it been justified? Hadn't she given him a reason to doubt her? I didn't want this, Claire said softly. I never wanted this. Lily's gaze snapped to her, sharp and accusing. Didn't you? You could have stopped it if you really wanted to. Claire recoiled as if slapped. Lily, Lily stood abruptly, cutting her off. You don't get to play the victim now, Claire. You chose this. You chose me? The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Claire's chest tightened, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. She had made choices, subtle, quiet choices that had led them to this moment. And now she was trapped in the wreckage. The days that followed were a blur of tension and silence. David didn't return, though he called once, his voice cold and clipped as he informed Claire he needed time to think. Claire didn't press him, unsure of what she would even say if he asked for an explanation. Lily, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by his absence. She moved through the house with a calm confidence that unnerved Claire. When they crossed paths, Lily would look at her with an intensity that made Claire's heart race, a mix of defiance and expectation, as if daring her to take the next step, but Claire couldn't. The weight of her guilt and fear was paralyzing. She avoided Lily as much as possible, retreating to her room or losing herself in mundane tasks. She knew it was cowardly, but she didn't know how else to cope. One evening, as Claire was tidying up the living room, Lily appeared in the doorway. You've been avoiding me, Lily said, her tone neutral but her eyes accusing. I'm not avoiding you, Claire lied, her hands busy with the throw pillows. Lily stepped closer. Yes, you are. You're scared. Claire froze, the pillows slipping from her hands. I'm not scared, she said weakly. Lily's lips curved into a small, sad smile. You should be. Before Claire could respond, Lily turned and walked away, leaving her standing there trembling. That night, Claire lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She couldn't escape the memories, the whispered conversations, the stolen moments that had brought them to this point. She couldn't escape the truth. She was in love with Lily. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless. She had tried to deny it, tried to bury it under layers of rationalization and guilt, but it was no use. The feelings were there, undeniable and inescapable, but it didn't make them right. Claire sat up, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. She had to do something, anything, to fix this. She had to make it right. The next morning, Claire made a decision. She couldn't continue like this, living in a web of lies and guilt, tearing her family apart. She had to end it no matter how much it hurt. She found Lily in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. Lily looked up as Claire entered, her expression wary. "We need to talk," Claire said, her voice trembling but firm. Lily set down her mug, her eyes narrowing, her eyes narrowing. "What about us?" "About us," Claire said, taking a deep breath. "This, whatever this is, it has to stop." Lily's face hardened. "Why?" "Because he doesn't approve." "Because it's wrong," Claire said, her voice breaking. "It's hurting everyone, David. You, me. We can't keep doing this." Lily stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away? Pretend none of this ever happened?" Claire shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not pretending. I'll never forget what we've shared. But I can't let it destroy us." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but her expression remained defiant. "You're a coward." "Maybe I am," Claire admitted. "But I'm doing this because I love you. I'm doing this to you. And because I love him, I can't hurt him anymore. I can't hurt us anymore." Lily stared at her for a long moment, her jaw tight. Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Later that day, David returned home. His face was drawn and weary, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes as he looked at Claire. "Can we talk?" he asked. Claire nodded, her heart pounding. They sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy. "I've been thinking," David began, his voice low. "About us?" "About everything." Claire swallowed hard. "Me too." David met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "Do you love her?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "I love you. And I want to fix this." David's eyes searched hers, his jaw tightening. Finally, he nodded. "Then we try. But things have to change. They will," Claire promised, her voice barely a whisper. The next day, Claire packed a suitcase. She told David she needed some time away to clear her head, to figure out how to move forward. He didn't argue, just nodded silently as she kissed his cheek and walked out the door. She didn't tell Lily where she was going. She couldn't bear another confrontation. Instead, she left a note on Lily's bed, simple and to the point: "I love you, but I need to let you go." As she drove away, tears blurred her vision. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had to face it alone.